Everything you learned about the age of exploration is backwards, and this video proves it. In 2013, French archaeologist Pierre Tallet was excavating in the Egyptian desert when his brush struck papyrus fragments. What he uncovered would rewrite maritime history. The world's oldest shipping logbook, 4,600 years old, written by a harbor official named Merer. The entries read like modern manifests. Departed with crew of 20, loaded limestone blocks, crossed to Tura quarries, return journey, 3 days. What Merer was describing so casually was a 120-mile round trip across the Red Sea. His site, Wadi el-Jarf, was an industrial shipping complex with massive stone anchors, 30 ship galleries carved into cliffs, and administrative buildings for hundreds of workers. This was systematic maritime navigation happening when most of the world was still mastering basic agriculture. But here's what will shock you. When European explorers finally reached East Africa 4,000 years later, they found maritime networks so sophisticated that Portuguese captains admitted, in these waters, they possess knowledge far superior to our own. How did maritime expertise evolve across African history, from ancient foundations to ocean mastery that stunned European explorers? And why was this achievement systematically minimized in historical records? This is that story. But Merer's logbook wasn't the beginning. African maritime traditions stretch back much further. In 1987, a Fulani herdsman digging a well in northern Nigeria struck wood. Archaeologists uncovered what he'd found, a canoe, buried in what was once the shore of ancient Lake Mega Chad. The Dufuna Canoe is 8,500 years old, the second oldest boat ever discovered. At 27.6 feet long, it's nearly 3 times the length of the Pessie canoe, found in the Netherlands, previously considered the world's oldest boat. This represents complex boat building in Africa while Europe was still in the Mesolithic period, thousands of years before the Bronze Age. And this wasn't isolated. At Abydos in Egypt, archaeologists found 14 wooden vessels measuring up to 75 feet long, buried 5,000 years ago. These weren't simple dugouts. They were planked ships requiring advanced woodworking and engineering. The oldest depiction of any boat comes from El Salah in central Sudan, etched on granite between 7,050 and 6,820 BC. It shows a vessel with a domed enclosure and large rear oar, design elements appearing consistently in pre-dynastic art throughout the Nile Valley, suggesting standardized vessel designs and established maritime traditions. How were they navigating with such precision? Egyptian texts reveal they used what they called the imperishable stars, circumpolar constellations that never dip below the horizon, providing constant directional references during night sailing. They tracked Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, as a precision instrument. The Heliacal rising of Sirius, its first appearance on the eastern horizon before sunrise, predicted the Nile flood with accuracy that amazed ancient Greek observers centuries later. The Khufu ship, discovered in 1954 beside the Great Pyramid, demonstrates engineering capabilities that challenge conventional timelines of maritime development. At 143 feet long, it was built with cedar planking joined by rope lashing rather than metal nails. This created flexible joints that could absorb wave stress. When swells hit, the vessel could bend rather than break. This same principle, flexible construction for ocean conditions, would appear again in African dhows thousands of years later, proving superior to rigid European ship construction. Whether this specific vessel sailed or served ceremonially, the engineering knowledge it represents was clearly available. The same construction appears throughout Egyptian maritime art. While these developments occurred along the Nile and Red Sea, West Africans were also developing their maritime traditions along an entirely different hydrographic system. The Niger-Senegal-Gambia river complex created a vast network of waterways stretching over 2,500 miles. These rivers became highways for trade, communication, and cultural exchange, and produced their own maritime innovations. By the medieval period, the Ghana and Mali empires controlled trade networks that moved gold, salt, and goods across West Africa. Much of this commerce traveled by water. Large vessels navigated these rivers carrying tons of cargo, connecting interior kingdoms to coastal ports. The Bozo people of the Niger River developed specialized fishing vessels and navigation techniques adapted to the river's seasonal flooding patterns. The Sorko people became renowned as river pilots, their knowledge passed down through generations of professional navigators who could read the river's moods, where sandbars shifted, where currents ran strongest, when floods would come. When European observers finally documented these traditions in the 19th century, they found maritime technology that had clearly been refined over centuries. Vessels measuring 100 feet long and 14 feet wide transported 60 to 80 tons of cargo with crews of 18. These weren't small canoes, but substantial cargo ships. Large vessels fitted with square sails, masts, and rudders didn't just navigate rivers. They conducted coastal voyages along the Atlantic, traveling hundreds of miles between ports. Senegambian mariners routinely transported goods 300 miles along the coast, navigating open ocean between ports. The Mpongwe of Gabon used canoes up to 60 feet long with capacities exceeding 10 tons, regularly traveling 300 to 400 miles along the coast, conducting trade between coastal communities. European observers were genuinely surprised by this capability. One noted that Mpongwe boats were so well built, they would land them under favorable circumstances in South America. This wasn't theoretical. These were working vessels operating regular trade routes. What's remarkable is that this represents a completely independent maritime tradition from what developed along the Nile and Red Sea. West Africans weren't learning from Egyptian techniques. They were solving the same problems through their own innovations, adapted to entirely different environments and needs. African maritime expertise wasn't confined to one region. It was a continent-wide tradition of innovation. As Egyptian influence extended south through trade and cultural contact, navigation techniques spread to Nubian kingdoms along the Nile, and eventually to the Aksumite Empire in present-day Ethiopia. By the 1st century CE, Aksum's port of Abydos had become what the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, a 1st century merchant's handbook, described as a cosmopolitan trading hub where Roman, Indian, and Persian merchants conducted business. Aksumite gold coins have been found from Egypt to India, evidence of extensive trade networks. Chinese Tang dynasty records from the 8th century document African merchants in Guangzhou as regular participants in established trade networks. While direct documentation of the intermediate centuries is limited, archaeological evidence and later detailed accounts suggest navigation knowledge continued developing along African coasts, adapting to different maritime environments and incorporating innovations from trading partners. By 800 CE, maritime knowledge had been developing across African history for over 4 millennia, from the Dufuna Canoe to Egyptian Red Sea operations, from West African coastal networks to Aksumite Indian Ocean connections. This accumulated expertise was about to encounter a new environment, the seasonal wind patterns of the broader Indian Ocean. African navigators would master these patterns so completely that ships could cross thousands of miles and arrive within days of predicted schedules. In Part 2, we'll see how this expertise created maritime networks connecting 3 continents, and why the most traveled man in the medieval world declared an African port one of the most beautiful places in the world. Hit that like button if you learned something new from this documentary. Share it with someone who needs to know this history. And subscribe, because this is exactly the kind of untold African history that is hidden from mainstream history. See you in Part 2.